Welcome to everyone here, and I truly am so happy that you have joined me in this practice this morning. As always, I'll just very gently talk you into the practice. Because in a way, this practice is no different from the lives that we live. A practice such as this is here to help us to seamlessly blend our daily lives into this practice, and this practice into and through the unfolding of our daily lives. Before we begin, also just remind yourself that you can leave this practice at any time, because I completely accept and understand that an hour can be a little bit long for some people. And most of my teachers, they've made it very clear that all you need is about 20 minutes of practice a day, of just sitting or lying down and just being, and continuing the practice into your day as you move about, as you interact with others, as you have your food and so on. And so give yourself permission that you know that this practice is here every day. You know there are recordings. And so you're not here to force yourself in any way. I know I have all of you on mute. So I don't know what the circumstances around you are like, what sounds you can hear, how many people there are around you, how many animals you have around you, car alarms, radios, music, all those little things that we have very little control over. In many ways, what we've created right now in our own little way is a little lab, a sort of experiment. Where we've removed some of those things that we can control. I can't speak for you, but for me, I've fed my cats. My phone is on silent and in a different room. The doors are closed. And so I've managed to control some of the things around me that could, in inverted commas, disturb me. And I'm sure you've done the same. To the extent that you can control those variables, you've tried to. But the reason this is a lab is because there's always something that you cannot control. Just like life. And so the neighbor's car alarm might be going off. If you're in a flat, you might hear footsteps above you, or the children might be playing some sort of a game in the room. And these little variables that you cannot control, they might lead you to feel as though your practice was being disturbed or interrupted in some way. But where there are changes that occur around us, which is really what life is about, many different changes around us, starting with something as big as this coronavirus phenomena, and then there are, of course, the behavior and the words of the people around us. I believe that if we've met in this way, in this meditation room of sorts, we've to a degree come to the realization that we might be able to control their behavior to a degree, but not completely, because life always has it that in order to allow us to grow, we find ourselves with people who are slightly different from us, sometimes very different from us. And in many ways, this is what the core of this practice is about. For all these different movements that we are unable to control externally, we begin to learn how to adapt ourselves, change the way in which we perceive and experience these changes. Sometimes by finding a different thought about the subject. Which can be very challenging when we identify ourselves with our mind. It becomes like floating down a raging river. A river that's accumulated thousands and millions of different experiences from the past. Every smile, every tear, every frustration, and every joy from the day we were born. Each experience building up a set of beliefs which now seems to carry us. Very often feeling as though we were immersed in this stream of thoughts. Only a stream. We know we can't drown. And how do we know that? Because of what we've been through. It's very often felt impossible, hasn't it? When we stood in the middle of this, what seemed like a raging river, we thought all hope was lost. But yet life went on. And here we are, right now, sitting together, breathing, being together. And so this is a practice where my voice will guide you towards the different tools, nothing complicated, no fancy instruments, tools that we have always had with us and will continue to have, which will guide us so that we may first recognize that we are only being carried within a shallow stream and not the raging river that we once imagined ourselves to be in. But no matter how shallow the water is, no matter how safe it is, when we find ourselves struggling, kicking and punching, it feels like a raging deep river where anything can happen. During today's practice, we'll see if we can step outside of this stream. A moment ago I spoke about choosing thoughts that would allow us to stabilize ourselves, adapt ourselves to all those changes around us that we are unable to control, referring also to the relationships, the people, the economic situations, and so much more. As we step outside of this thought stream, as we settle down onto the banks of this thought stream, where there is kindness, where there is wisdom, outside of all those old habits, those old belief systems, which we really have very little control of. We begin to find ourselves being able to direct our attention only to those thoughts which will allow us to stabilize, to adapt. Very often those thoughts which will give us a new way in which to react to those people, those changes, those movements. We often use metaphors in this practice which help us define our relationship with our mind, which help us to define our relationship with the world. In today's practice, I'd like to imagine yourself, or maybe not imagine yourself, but have you ever seen one of those artists who walk the tightrope, where they attach a line, sometimes between two buildings, two poles, and then they attempt to walk through. In many ways, we can use this as a metaphor for our practice today. A metaphor for the day ahead of us, where we take one step at a time, and then we stop. We balance ourselves. We adapt. We make peace with where we find ourselves at that exact moment, which happens to be now. For us, at least. And then another step. This time the neighbor's car alarm goes off. You find yourself losing your balance, losing your peace. And so you stop. You don't take the next step. You breathe. You notice where you are. How do you stabilize yourself? By allowing, giving that sound, that car alarm, those footsteps, those voices, permission to enter into your experience at this moment. What does it feel like to push against that sound? What does it feel like to have this conversation whereby you ask the sound to leave because you came here to meditate, you came here to do a mindfulness practice? And so you have expectations that there be absolute silence. And then a conversation begins, a dialogue begins, and then you find yourself becoming more and more agitated. I want you to go away. Why can't you keep quiet? Neighbor of mine who's talking too loudly. Switch off that car alarm. And that's the wobble, losing balance. But what if that line represented our lives? What if this practice today represented that whole experience of inching our ways forward, stabilizing, breathing, becoming present, making peace with where we are at this moment. And I think we've somehow found ourselves, and I'm referring to those of us who are practicing together at this moment. I think we found ourselves in the middle of this rope right now. It's comfortable, it's exhilarating. We don't want to take our minds off the balance, the stability, the sensations that we can experience under the soles of our feet, our toes. And then we remember something from the past. An argument, something someone's done to you, something you might have done to someone. But you're right here in the middle of this journey. Thinking about the start of the journey, about the history. In order to continue the journey, does it mean that you have to go back to the beginning? Do you have to walk backwards, inch your way all the way to the start of the line, and then start again? No, that's a lot of hard work, isn't it? And it can be quite unpleasant walking backwards or retracing our steps. No, instead, we stabilize. We just want to make peace with where we are right now, and then continue the journey. And so we breathe. We balance our bodies. And only then do we take the next step forward. We were likening our practice, our journey in this life, to that of someone who walks the tightrope. Each step forward, and then balancing, making peace with where we are. And then another step forward. All those distractions, those sounds, the worries in our mind, they often come from us wanting to get to the end of the tightrope, or sometimes remembering some event in the past, and then wanting to return back to the beginning and start the journey all over again. This is a practice where we remind ourselves to enjoy every moment of the journey. And its completeness. Coming to the realization that it is a continuing journey. Have you ever noticed how when the tightrope walker reaches the end of the rope, when he reaches his destination, he doesn't just retire. He wants a new adventure. And then he finds a new rope to walk. And after that, a new one. Because he begins to understand that the exhilaration is in the journey. The adventure is in every step that he or she takes. Could that destination simply be a mirage? We might even observe our own lives. How we often thought that if we had that one last item, that perhaps it might be an object or something to do with our status, an award, a degree, a job, a particular amount of money, conditions. We might have told ourselves that if once that condition was satisfied, I will be completely happy, completely at peace. And then we reached the end of the tightrope. We reached that destination. And then we discovered there's just another rope to walk. And another, and another, until we finally arrive where we are right now. And I'm referring to this particular point where you find your body in front of your computers, in front of your phones or your tablets, with my voice coming through. Beginning to consider for the very first time could the joy be in the journey? in the exhilaration of this life, the exhilaration that we experience as we take every step on this rope, enjoying the views, enjoying our ability to stabilize, in the stillness choose our thoughts, switching the thought from purely one in which we want to reach that destination, satisfy that condition, each one of us has different conditions, don't we? For some of us it will be, I want everyone around me to behave exactly the way I want them to. To obey me, to make me happy, to be kind, to be generous. And then that destination never really comes, does it? We reach the end of the rope. We still haven't been able to control everyone. And then there's another rope. And for some of us, it might be as we walk, as we find ourselves in the middle of this rope, where we are right now, this moment. We've forgotten how much fun it is to be here with the breeze blowing through our hair and our skin, the incredible views. It's exhilarating. We are so fortunate. We have these computers. We have this space around us where we have this ability to practice together. I do hope you have enough in your fridge or enough in your cupboards to feed you for the rest of today. Or if not, just for your breakfast later on. Our physical health. Our senses, the sense of hearing, through which you can hear my voice, perhaps even see me if your eyes are open, looking around you, your beautiful room, your beautiful spaces, than my form, which is really nothing. The ability to breathe. All of this very much like that exhilaration that this trapeze artist is experiencing at this moment. But it's so easy to forget this journey, isn't it? And for some of us, as I mentioned a moment ago, it would be what's waiting at the end of that pole, at the end of this rope. Is it 10,000 pounds? Is it, if I had 10,000 pounds, I will be happy? Or is it 1 million pounds? Or is it 10 million pounds? Or is it 100 million pounds? And then you get to the end. But you've practiced yourself out of enjoying where you are. And so when you reach the end of the rope, you've forgotten to enjoy, how to enjoy the present moment. And it is a beautiful place. You're no longer on the rope. You've stepped out of the rope onto that destination. You've got your 10,000 pounds or your 10 million pounds. But because you've lost sight, because we have lost sight of the ability to now enjoy the stability of this elevated view where we are safe. We have what we were aiming for. The views are incredible. The rewards have arrived. But we've forgotten to be present. And so we look for a new journey, a new set of conditions. And then it begins to get tiring. A new pair of shoes, a new holiday, from 10 million pounds to 100 million pounds, and then I'll be happy. From a Mercedes to a Rolls-Royce and beyond. None of these are wrong. None of these are bad. But I hope you understand the inner message of this particular practice, and that is what the essence of our practice here is about. It's about making peace with where we are. And recognizing the beauty. And if you can't see the beauty in this present moment, that's absolutely fine as well. Because for most of us, our mind has a momentum. And this momentum is what we come to define as its habitual way of thinking. And so if you've been thinking in a particular way for the last 2 days, the last 3 days, the last 10 years, the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, you'll find the mind carrying that exact momentum. Like a speeding car. Which will refuse to stop immediately, even when the brakes are applied. But this practice is not about applying the brakes. Sometimes this car, this speeding car, which is the mind, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of laughter. There's a lot of incredible movies and TV programs and conversations, stimulating conversations. incredible pieces of music, all those things that you love. And when the car goes through those particular journeys, it's wonderful. There's so much laughter, there's exhilaration. And you want to identify yourself with the mind because it feels good, doesn't it? And then you sit inside this car and you lock the doors. You enjoy the scenery, you enjoy the speed. You enjoy almost everything about the journey. So much so that you begin to identify yourself. This is my car. Me and this car are one. And then occasionally potholes will appear. Really bad storms. And then the car, after some years, you notice the car's gonna need some new replacement parts. Little bolts will start coming loose. And then the ride gets a bit rough. And those are the more painful, uncomfortable events in our life. We all go through them, don't we? But because of all the good stuff, because of how amazing the journey was and those other parts, we gradually began to believe we were the car. And so when we need new tires, when the brakes start wearing out, it causes us unimaginable pain, doesn't it? Because we've begun to believe ourselves to be the car. Which is where this practice comes in. It teaches us how to get outside of this car safely, so you don't have to jump out of it while it's moving, but just through a single breath, like the one you're taking right now, you magically find yourself standing outside of the car, observing the movement. And so you didn't even need to stop the car. But you begin to recognize as you stood outside of the car that sometimes it takes you through very scenic routes. Imagine yourself maybe stepping back further and further away from the car so that it almost becomes like a map. Like one of those Google map things where you begin to see how some parts of the journey, very scenic through waterfalls and nature parks, gorgeous sunshine. And then some of the parts, very steep slopes, very dangerous corners. At least it looks dangerous. Even more dangerous when you were in the car speeding. But now we've stepped outside of this vehicle we call the mind. We breathe. We sit, we smile, because one direct consequence of stepping outside of this car is that we've also removed our foot from the accelerator. And so there's no one to power the car anymore. But it's still moving because of the momentum we've picked up over the past days, weeks, months, years, lifetimes. But now we're sitting here. We're breathing, observing, noticing. And then the car gradually begins to slow down. Slower and slower and slower. Until it comes to a stop. And once it's stopped, it's a lot easier to change those different parts, isn't it? It's much easier. I can identify. I might have to take it to a mechanic, but I can still... The mechanic can't treat the car if it's moving. And so now when it's still, I can see which parts I want to keep. Yeah, I think I'll keep that part that's inquisitive, that likes to question things, that likes to laugh, that sees the humor in everything. No matter how bleak and dark, I'll still find something to smile about it because I can't control it. And then there are those rusty bolts. They've been causing those thoughts. They've been causing me a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. But they've made me feel a lot of anger against this person or that person, and worse still, sometimes against myself. And those standards that, I don't know, my parents, was it my parents? Did they set certain standards that they told me I had to live up to? What about those magazines? Those Vogue magazines and the Mary Claire magazines and the GQ magazines. They've told me how I should look in order to feel successful, to feel beautiful, to be good looking. Those are all, they've made me feel a little bit inadequate. They've made me feel less than what I feel right now, what I should feel, what I could feel. And so we throw away some of, not really throw away, but just replace them. Because they have to be replaced, don't they? With nice, shiny, new suspension coils, new bolts, sometimes a whole new windshield, sometimes even a new paint job. But all of this is only possible when I step outside of this vehicle I now know as my mind. Strange it is. I once believed myself to be this car, this vehicle. I thought it was a part of myself, but now I'm entering into a new relationship with it. I'm going to continue using it, because it is a very valuable tool in this journey. It's going to help me, some of these memories I have, they're going to help me to, in my work, in the way I invest, in the way I look after my home, in the way I deal with people. And so it's a very useful tool, but that's all it is. My mind is a tool, and that's what today is about. Just developing this new relationship with the mind. Developing, the key word here is developing, practicing. In a moment, you will hear the sound of the bell, which will bring this practice hopefully to a very gentle and a very mindful close. But we remind ourselves that even though we use the word close, it doesn't really end, does it? The bell will simply mean we've reached the middle of this rope. And then there's the next step after the bell. And then we stabilize, because we might have had glimpses into this magical ability we have within each and every one of us to simply breathe, become more present than we've ever been before. And in the process, stabilize before taking the next step. Reminding ourselves to enjoy the beauty, the scenery, the breeze, the joy and the laughter that every moment could potentially present to us. In this state of allowing.